Oké, welkom allemaal op dit de laatste talk van TIDO's voor dit jaar. Is there anyone in the room who doesn't speak Dutch? Then I'll...
There may be someone on the internet.
Maybe. Okay, I'll continue in English anyway then. That's not a problem. Okay, the talk is punching holes through the corporate firewall. At previous conferences I have done this talk with together with Dag Wiers, who is just entering. This time I'll be doing it by myself. He has enough talks already, I think. The talk focuses mostly on Proxy Tunnel, and I'll first tell you a bit about Proxy Tunnel. It was written by Jos Visser and me back in 2001 when we were stuck in a corporate network from a Dutch bank. And well, we couldn't log into systems outside because their firewall was quite restrictive and only allowed web traffic. So we came up with the idea of writing Proxy Tunnel and decided, well, maybe more people could use this, so let's upload it to SourceForge, open source it, and maybe someone else can have use from it. Over the years, we've edited various features based on requests people send us. One of them is like NTLM support for Windows proxies that use NT authentication based on domains. Proxy bouncing, which I'll talk more about later, and other features. And these are some of the names of people who have helped us with significant code contributions over the years. First, I'll explain a bit how a proxy works. I think most people here already know, but let's say we have a client machine, your laptop by example, a proxy server somewhere, and a web server out on the internet. If your web browser makes a request and it has a proxy configured, it first connects to the proxy and says, well, give me this and this URL. The proxy will then connect to the web server, send it the URL it's requesting, the web server will send an answer back, which will be then sent back to the client. Well, this proxy, of course, since it's somewhere in the middle, can see all the data passing through, can maybe alter data even, it can allow or deny certain requests. I've known quite a few networks that have some filtering technique and saying, well, you can't view this and this website because we deem it to be unsuitable for work. So it can practically see everything it's doing, everything you're doing. But in the case of HTTPS, secure websites, a proxy has no idea what you're doing. All the traffic is encrypted, and the proxy only sees to what IP address you are connecting. So it's slightly different with SSL. The proxy just sees the IP address and the port number you're connecting to, and gives you a transparent connection, and your browser and the proxy can't inspect the traffic going back and forth, only that is traffic. So in the case of the SSL proxy, you first get a connect to the proxy server. The proxy server makes a connection to the web server, and from then on you have a transparent connection between your browser or your system and the web server on the other end. So if we have this, if we can connect to web servers, to secure web servers, and you can usually test it, you can find out quick enough if that works. Go to Gmail, go to a banking website. Then you most likely can connect to an arbitrary secure website. That usually means that the proxy is allowed to connect to the entire internet as long as it's HTTPS. So yeah, if you can get your proxy to connect, then you can make various interesting connections that maybe weren't originally intended to happen. So in OpenSSH there's the proxy command, and Proxy Tunnel can use that proxy command feature to connect outside. So yeah, how do you get OpenSSH to connect to the internet? Well, if there are no restrictions, like at home or on an ISP or Wi-Fi, just use SSH normally, connect to a system somewhere. If there's a transparent web proxy somewhere between your machine and the internet, well, if it's allowing traffic on port 443, it usually does, then you can just run your SSH daemon on 443 and still make a connection, just tell your client to use a different port. Well, in the case of non-transparent proxies, you can use, for example, Netcat. It can send the required header, make the connection for you, and then SSH will be able to connect. But if the proxy requires some more advanced features, maybe authentication, or you want to do other interesting stuff, then, well, Proxy Tunnel comes along and it will help you make the connection. So what Proxy Tunnel does is it connects to the proxy. It does basic or NTLM authentication. So if the proxy asks for a username and password, it'll take care of that. It'll make the connection to the endpoint and then hand over the connection to your SSH client, and you can log into the system on the other side. So typically you run your SSH daemon on port 443, and then after you make your connection, you can use the port forwarding features and the SOC support in OpenSSH to tunnel arbitrary data to the other side and to the rest of the internet. The example SSH config is shown here. You have a host entry for your system that you're connecting to. You're telling it to use a proxy command. The proxy command is the Proxy Tunnel. You specify the IP or host name and the port for your proxy server and the machine you want to connect to. And this is a macro which expands to the host name here. Dynamic forward turns on the SOC support in OpenSSH, which will allow any SOCs-enabled application to make connections which will then be tunneled over OpenSSH. And these two options make sure that traffic is always flowing over the tunnel. Most web proxies were of course designed for web traffic, which is usually a request, an answer, and then maybe a few more requests and answers, and then it stops. So most proxies check if a connection hasn't had any traffic on it, they kill it, because they can use it for other purposes, of course. And these two options will send a null packet back and forth between your client and the SSH server every 20 seconds, thereby keeping the connection alive. In case the proxy that you're using requires authentication, you need to specify a username and a password. And there are various ways to do this. You can either type them in on the command line, but if you're on a shared box, other people can just look at the process list, and then somewhere in there will be your proxy username and password, so that might not be very handy in all cases. Proxy Tunnel can also look into environment variables for the username and password. It's a bit more secure, but still privileged users might be able to find them out, but yeah, that's acceptable risk in most cases. You can also store the username and password in a file and then specify to Proxy Tunnel, well, here it is, this is my config. And you can also have Proxy Tunnel just prompt you for it, which is usually handy if you want to try different username and password combinations, or just don't want to store the password somewhere. Or maybe even if you have a system that uses one-time passwords or other non-fixed systems. In the future, we might be using a key manager and just use maybe GNOME keyring to prompt you for a password, but we don't do that yet. I'll skip the demo till the end for now. So, as authentication, we can also use NTLM to get over Windows proxies. We can send additional headers. Some devices require that you use a specific browser, or maybe you can use this to disguise your traffic further by saying, well, this is not, make it look less like SSH traffic, and then send a user agent header and send extra headers which make it look like regular web traffic. And in cases if you have a proxy that does deep packet inspection, or actually devices like blue coats look more into the traffic and can spot the difference between web SSL traffic and, in this case, SSH traffic, we have hacked in a feature to tunnel everything over SSL again, making it look like regular web traffic. This does require that you're running S-tunnel or another SSL wrapper on the server side. But yeah, it will hide your traffic even further. As a last feature, we borrowed set Proxytunnel support from the public, the portable OpenSSH, which will allow you to just change the process name in the process listing. So if you're on a shared system, it'll hide the Proxytunnel process. Yeah, for example, you can call it Apache or Bash or something that doesn't really look suspicious. This is the setup that Dag came up with. He decided, well, I can of course just make a connection to my system at home. Let's say this is your system. But I have more systems behind my, in my home network, which are not directly accessible from the internet. Or maybe they are on the internet, but I just only allow one machine to have connections from the outside. So he hacked Proxytunnel to support 2 proxies. So you can first specify connect to my local proxy, which is on the network, the corporate network. Make that a connection to a proxy you yourself control, where you can have your own access control. You have username, password authentication. You can specify only allow these IP addresses in or out. And then from there on, connect to one or more various systems behind that, using just the same infrastructure. Well, what this does is, of course, makes a more flexible configuration. And another nice feature is if you use Apache as the proxy server here, you can, besides having it proxy, it's also a regular web server. So you can just put a website there that doesn't really have anything on it, just some random pages. And if someone sees the connection on the corporate proxy to your system, sees, well, it's port 443, so it's SSL, types it in his web browser, he just gets a regular web page. No suspicion there. Well, of course, most Linux systems have Apache on it. Doesn't require you to install anything out of the ordinary. And this proxy bouncing, well, it works for various advanced use cases, but it's also for the very simple ones. There's one issue that Apache doesn't allow you to send a connect proxy command, which is what Proxytunnel uses, if you're already connected over SSL. It's not really a big problem, but yeah, we filed a bug report and they're still finding out if they want to fix it or not. So the Apache config you could use on the remote proxy looks a bit like this. You're first asking to allow proxy requests, so to turn on the proxy feature in your Apache. You say, well, I'm willing to allow connect on 22, in this case 2022, and you probably add 443 there as well, so you can use it as a regular web proxy. And you can use allow and deny blocks to say, well, allow, in this case, deny proxying, but allow it again for, in this case, Dag's domain, and from some specific IP addresses. You can also use authentication there on your proxy, regular username password combinations. And we're just saying here, well, here's your password file, and as long as they provide authentication, you're in. Well, of course, there's more tools to do this. After we wrote Proxytunnel, well, we found out there were some other tools doing something more or less the same. corkscrew is one that's quite well known. It's in most distributions. But it only had the basic functions. You can make a connect. And only since the latest 2.0 version that came out somewhere this year, it actually does authentication. But it still doesn't do MTLM and some other advanced features. GNU HTTP tunnel and HTTUN work on HTTP level instead of the HTTPS, which would be handy in some cases, but it does require that the server side has a daemon that'll wrap all your packets back from HTTP traffic to normal TCP IP and back. So it's a bit more of a hassle to set up. Proxy PR tunnel is kind of the same like HTTP tunnel, only it does SOC support. So it's handy for more applications. And SOHT, the same, but it's in Java, so it's quite heavy on your server. Well, besides tunneling over HTTP and HTTPS, you can also tunnel over other protocols, and especially this might be handy in public access points. They usually allow you to either get DNS or ping packets out. Just 2 weeks ago I was in Hamburg, and the hotel I was in managed to actually block DNS traffic for once. But they didn't block TCP ICMP packets. So I could use ICMP-TX in this case, which wraps your TCP packets in an ICMP ping and will allow you to just create a connection. It does, of course, require that you have a daemon listening on your server, listening for ping packets and replying. Just like ICMP-TX ping tunnel claims to do the same thing, only I couldn't get it working. And Iodine and Ozyman DNS, and Ozyman is written by Dan Kaminsky, tunnel traffic over DNS requests. So they usually work because, well, DNS practically works anywhere. The side effect of this, or the low point of this, is that it's quite slow. You can maybe get 4 to 8 kilobytes per second because you're sending huge amounts of DNS requests who are going via multiple servers back to your home box. And of course requires that you have a DNS server running, or a Iodine or Ozyman DNS server on your system. And you can't do that the same with a regular name server, so you need spare IP addresses. Well, besides these tools, there are of course many other ways to get packets in and out of a network, because no network is really disconnected from the rest of the internet as long as you can browse. Or so there are various tricks. Well, for Proxy Tunnel we have a few open issues. One of is the connect bug I already talked about in Apache. We do have a fix, we have a patch. It's just not in the main distribution of Apache yet. And we're thinking about maybe using a RC file for config, but if someone's willing to send patches. I'll give a small demo now, and if there are any questions, I'll take them as well.
I know of a corporate network that does the SSL or SSL re-signing of the domains. You get always, if you use Firefox 3, you get always a warning that it's not a valid certificate, because it's signed by the proxy. Do you think it's possible to go through there? Because I think the proxy will inspect everything, even the SSL connections.
Yeah, in the case of where you have a proxy that actually kills your connections, makes a new one and re-encrypts it, there's of course no clear channel outside. So this will effectively block tunneling systems like this. I myself haven't encountered any networks where it's in use, so I haven't been able to test it and see if there are ways around it. But yeah, I myself wouldn't even trust a network like that, because if maybe I was there and I wanted to go to my banking site, then I'd know that somewhere in that connection the encryption is broken and I can't trust the connection anymore. I mean, the owner of the proxy can see everything I do to my banking site and can see my passwords. And well, in that case, I'll just pick up my phone in UMTS connection, or maybe just wait.
Wait until they get home.
But yeah, for most, I don't think there are many companies using something like this, because it'll break every and all SSL websites.
Yeah, true.
And yeah, you can get your, if you're in a really tight encrypted network, you can have the certificate from the proxy installed on all the clients and all the browsers, which will not show you the message then, but it'll still be an unencrypted connection somewhere in the middle.
If you look at the specifics of the website, they will show that it's the corporate certification that you get.
Yeah, then they have to use something like a wildcard certificate, and otherwise your browser will complain that it doesn't match. Yeah. But yeah, it's not a very clean and good solution. Yeah. But it will block tunneling requests, of course, because there's no single channel.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
Yes, why don't just use OpenVPN?
Well, OpenVPN is blocked on lots of networks. It does require outgoing UDP traffic. Yeah. And I've been in quite a few networks where the only thing allowed is HTTP and HTTPS.
Do you know Proxytunnel? It's a modified OpenVPN client which patches all network through port 443. So you get practically the same idea.
Could be.
Yeah.
This was written back in 2001, so yeah.
Then it's developed a lot earlier than Proxytunnel, because it's developed in like 2004 or so.
I have a question. Suppose they do traffic analysis on the number of packets that are sent.
Mm-hmm.
They can easily distinguish an SSH connection from a web connection.
Yeah, it's still, if you're doing packet inspection, you can definitely see that this is not your basic HTTPS traffic. For one, because the connection will live for quite a long time. I mean, my connections usually live for about 8 hours. And during that connection, you see some traffic in the beginning, and lots of idle, and some traffic halfway, and some more traffic, and some more idle, and until the connection dies. Where basically, if it's web traffic, you'll probably see some traffic in the beginning, and then the connection dies. Or if it's something like streaming, you'll see just a basic level of traffic going on all the time.
But if you have an Ajax-like website, then you may have a slightly more SSH-like traffic pattern, where it first does some requests, and then the user thinks, and then some more requests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with the keep alives these days, web sessions will last longer and will do traffic and wait and do traffic and wait, but still you'll probably be able to spot an SSH connection, especially if you start doing stuff like SCP and downloading larger files over it, or
But downloading via HTTPS is also a burst of
and then nothing, yeah. And this will be, if you look at the traffic volume, would be spike, and idle in between. So
couldn't you fill it with chaff?
Yeah, you could. There's least traffic flowing all the time due to the keep alive, and of course you can, if you want to make it unclear, you can just send pings back and forth, and maybe send bigger pings, or
you can use SSH channels for that as well. If you want in the background have some stuff doing over.
What I usually do is I use proxy switch in Firefox and set my proxy to the SOX proxy in SSH, thereby getting all my traffic over the SSH tunnel and getting all my traffic first home and then onto the rest of the internet, which will give more traffic and a different traffic pattern than regular.
If you do the packet inspection, then at least you have to allow the connection for some time before you decide to break it. And one of the things that was asked last presentation was, isn't it possible to make Proxytunnel reconnect the moment it closes, because then you can again use that connection. But then I think for being able to implement that, we have to have something running on the other side.
Yeah, it won't work with regular SSH because it'll say, well, hey, you're sending connection on a traffic on that connection, or
yeah, you have to reconnect also with SSH again. So
it wouldn't really work. But
I was just thinking about if you could do transparently reconnect. So if you're idle for a minute and you disconnect, and you reconnect 10 minutes later when you start typing.
That wouldn't work for SSH, but it might work if you're doing something like OpenVPN or another VPN solution where you're basically encapsulating TCP or IP packets over another protocol. So that will work with the Iodine or Ping Tunnel, because they are just basically a network interface again. And as long as your SSH is idle, you'll even be able to reconnect again, or just keep on typing as soon as the packet starts flowing again. But it won't work for a basic SSH connection because the background traffic network is gone if you disconnect. Let's see, is this big enough? I'll make it a bit bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. So on my laptop, I have well, a web server, a proxy server, an SSH running, so I can demo this. Normally, if you of course connect to an SSH server with an SSH client, it'll negotiate your connection. But for the demo purposes, I'll just do it with Telnet and Netcat. So if I just make a basic connection, you'll see the SSH version string from the server. So if we get to see this on a network connection, it means, well, we're to the endpoint. So if I want to use Proxy Tunnel, yeah. I tell it where my proxy is, and I tell it where to connect to. And it says, well, I'm first making a connection to your proxy server here, and then making a connection to the endpoint, and we're still seeing the SSH banner. I can make it a bit more visible. Here you actually see all the traffic going back and forth to the web server, to the proxy. So we're sending a connect. We're saying, well, do a keep alive. The proxy says, well, okay, connection established, and you have a proxy here, and then you have a connection. If you want to do authentication as well, then if in case your proxy requires that, I can specify it on the command line with the -p option. But I think I need to specify a different IP address for that. I'll leave it at that for a moment. But if you, just to demonstrate, if you specify a username and a colon and a password on the command line, it'll use that username and password. Or if you just specify a username, it'll prompt you for the password. You can also use encryption, so you can use SSL between your client and the proxy, or SSL between the proxy and the endpoint. In this case, I have SSL on my proxy, so it'll be on port 443. Good thing about development laptops, your stuff constantly changes under your nose. It should work actually, but that's better. Anyway, we're still seeing the SSH banner here, so the connection was made. And of course, you can also use authentication there. And as you can see in my SSL config, I have wrapped my SSH port 22 with SSL on port 2222, so I can make an SSL wrapped SSH connection. Of course, you have double encryption, but probably doesn't make it any safer. But it will disguise your SSH traffic in an SSL wrapper and an SSL negotiation. And of course, the negotiation is clearly visible if you do like a packet dump. So in this case, you won't be able to see the SSH banner if you do a packet dump. But you will see SSL negotiation, and therefore your traffic will look more like regular web traffic.
The reason why that Apache doesn't want to allow connect over HTTPS was because they use connect to set up the SSL connection. And so over an SSL connection, allowing connect to set up another SSL connection makes no sense because you're double wrapping it. But we want to use connect for another reason. We want to connect to another server. We don't necessarily want to do SSL over that one again. But they say, yeah, but, and then you get this mess about, yeah, but it is not mentioned in the specifications that it is allowed over at HTTPS.
And it's not disallowed.
Yeah.
But for HTTP, it isn't mentioned either. They just say that everything should work over HTTPS as well because it's just SSL wrapped, right?
Yeah, and of course you want to have a situation where you can securely connect to your proxy and still connect to HTTPS sites. In this case, if you would have your Apache proxy running in 443, so therefore having secure connections, maybe if you're in a wireless network, you'd want that. Then the Apache proxy will never allow HTTPS connect requests again. So over your secure proxy, you wouldn't be able to go to a secure website. So while we consider it a bug, Apache isn't quite convinced yet. But
we listed 3 use cases where it would be useful, even though the double SSL doesn't make sense, and they still don't want to do. Actually, they now said that if someone wants to maintain the patch and wants to offer it to the Apache guys, then they would consider it, but nobody is interested of going through that, sadly, of maintaining the patch for versions that you don't know how many will come.
Okay, one of the last demonstrations is the proxy bouncing. In this case, we'll be using a local proxy first. We also have a remote proxy, -R. In this case, I'll just be using the same proxy again, so we'll go to 2 Apaches and then to the endpoint. And I'll make it verbose just to be able to see what's happening. So here you see, well, we're connecting to the local proxy and then asking the local proxy to make a connection to the remote proxy. And the verbose output here says, well, connect here, connect again. And then we're on our destination point. So if you use this in SSH, you specify something like this. You have a host statement, proxy command, proxy tunnel. So I could use something like demo 5. And I'm logged into my system again. Or demo 4. So yeah, that's I think concludes the talk. If there's any other questions, me and Dag will take them. But
did you ever get into trouble with the system administrators that don't do this ever again?
Once I've had one of my colleagues tell me, well, this is not allowed, and well, better make sure no one finds out. On other cases, I usually ask if it's okay to use this, but yeah, In some cases where you specifically have to sign some confidentiality and network use agreements, it might not be smart to use this, and in this age of ubiquitous UMTS connections, it might be safer. But in most cases, it was either maybe not allowed on the corporate level, but allowed on the department level. If it gets me to do my job better, then they're usually happy with it, as long as I don't abuse it.
I sometimes get questions from security officers who want to block this kind of behavior. Now I have some ideas about that, but I was wondering, what are your ideas as a developer of such technology on countering this?
Well, of course, we've made some countermeasures in Proxy Tunnels over the years. So we have been thinking about countermeasures against Proxy Tunnel and stuff like this. One of the things that would at least make this harder or make this
I'm going to
less...
interrupt here, because last time somebody said the same question and I said, don't answer this because you're helping the
Yeah, but I know Tim.
Don't help him.
What can at least frustrate the Proxy Tunnel user is putting a time limit on your proxy connections. A regular web proxy will hardly ever have connections lasting more than 10 minutes. Of course, there's in cases of like large downloads, if I go to the Sun site and I have to download the latest Solaris 10 ISO, which is over SSL as well, it'll take me an hour or two, but you'll be seeing quite a large amount of traffic. And as you said, with traffic inspection, you'll be able to spot that this is not your basic connection.
Sometimes even the ability to see such a connection can already be a problem. I mean, if a system administrator runs a program to detect such kinds of connection and walks up to you and says, yeah, you can't do this, instead of just blocking it.
Yeah.
That may be easier for the system administrator.
Well, if the user doesn't use the encryption option, so the SSL option, which I mean in 99.9% of the cases it's not needed, you can easily spot this connection due to the SSH banner you'll be seeing on port 443. SSH will always clearly show you what it's doing and what it is with this banner. And a basic HTTPS website, well, doesn't show you anything. So even on the first 4 packets, you'll be able to see that this is not a HTTPS connection, and you can block it or notify it if you see an SSH banner. And of course, this part is always guaranteed to be there. This will be either a 1 or a 2. Then you can maybe raise alarm bells.
But does the proxy bouncing prevents this? Because you would get a normal HTTPS website. You can even include authentication, so that if you don't connect, it says connect is not allowed, but if you authenticate, then it's what is not allowed. So someone who wants to try and see if there's something behind it won't see it.
Another thing that will of course work is, like he said, having a proxy that breaks your connection and re-encrypts it, but it has the side effect of like no one trusts their banking anymore if they're in a network.
Because I saw a presentation last week about the guy who was able to detect OpenVPN connections to on port 443, and just by inspecting the kind of traffic, the number of connections,
you'll quite easily be able to detect this. It's not made to be undetectable with traffic inspection.
In how much time does he detect it? Does he detect it in 5 seconds or after 10 minutes? Or
you can probably detect it in 5 seconds because there's always some handshaking going on at the beginning of a protocol.
But that can happen
I'm
as
looking
well
at
if
the
you're
picture right
downloading.
now, so I can show it to you later.
Okay.
Other things that'll work is basically whitelisting. If you say, well, this proxy can only connect to 443 on this and this and this and this website, and well, maybe make a form that people can request new ones, and basically you'll notice that it'll be all the banking websites from the country you're in, Gmail, some other services, and well, basically anything else, well, bad luck. Or they'll try to inspect the website first before allowing you on. But that'll basically mean whitelisting, blacklisting.
My usual answer, well, it's very hard.
It's still,
Okay.
it's still very hard, and even if you block this avenue of attack, there's at least 10 others. Like the UMTS connection. Another thing we did with Proxy Tunnel way back in the early days, we had to do standby work, and as external contractors, we were not allowed to have a ISDN line paid by the client, but they still wanted us to do standby work. So what we did was, well, you couldn't make connections inbound. So what we had was, we'd dial up or dial to a ISDN line with our cell phone. It would never pick up, but it would log, my cell phone made this connection. And we then had a system where Proxy Tunnel would be fired up to connect to a specific IP address coupled to that phone number. So if I had to do some work, I called the phone number, I'd have ping running, or checking if the connection was up, and it would start the connection from inside the network to my home system, and then I could go back, and it was configured to, if it was idle for 5 minutes, to kill itself again. So as long as I was doing work, I could log in, and then when I logged out, the connection would die again. But yeah, you can also, of course, make reverse proxies, and you can open up the network. In theory, once I thought about, well, I could map the entire IP space for this company, wrap it in IPv6, and tunnel it to my laptop. And, well, wouldn't be smart to do, of course, but theoretically, I could make the entire IPv4 network from the company visible on IPv6 and routable as well.
No more questions?
No more questions? Yeah.
Thank you.